Hello and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen E. Andrews, writer, bookseller, collector. If you're new to the channel and you've been tempted by the title of this video, just to give it some context, I work in the book trade. I have done for 40 years as a bookshop manager, bookseller, copy editor and author with 3 books to my byline and various bits and pieces as well. So I'm speaking from a position of some experience, and today the facts and figures I'm going to give you are drawn from sources like Nielsen Bookscan, which is the official means by which the total consumer market of book sales in the UK is based. So it is strictly sort of scientific, and we're going to address the question of, is romantasy killing science fiction? Well, the answer in short is yes. Is it doing it intentionally? Of course it isn't. It's all about the publishing and it's all about where the budgets go. Okay, I have discussed this before and we're going to come back to it. But first of all, I want to talk to you about the facts and figures and discuss the top 5 books in the SFF category of the market from January to March inclusive, the first quarter of the calendar year 2024 in the UK. I don't have US figures. Somebody else will have to pick that up and run with that for me, as it were. So there we go. So how did books do? The British print market, that's not including things like audio downloads and ebooks, it shrank by almost 5% in that first quarter. And that was due to non-fiction sales, largely. Non-fiction sales have been in trouble for a while, particularly with hardcover non-fiction, which is an important part of the market. But as the price has been going up, the sales have been going on. Now, this decline was a bit arrested by adult fiction, and interesting, in adult fiction, the things which are really happening, as always, crime is always really happening. Crime is always the most reliable genre in terms of sales, has been as long as I've been a bookseller. It far outshines any other sort of genre or subject you can name within fiction, so that's always pretty good. And the other big thing has been romantasy. Now, if you're not familiar with romantasy as a term, what this means, of course, is it means fantasy, and by fantasy we mean traditional forms like sword and sorcery and high fantasy, which are virtually indistinguishable anyway: castles, dragons, swords, wizards, quests, heroes, heroines, what have you, all those things, but with a large element of romance. And that's romance with a small r. That's the love romance, as opposed to romanticism, the philosophical and literary movement. So that's what romantasy is, and this has been happening for some time. As YA has become more and more of a thing in the UK from the dawn of J.K. Rowling breaking through and doing really, really well, obviously, with the Harry Potter books. You couldn't do any better. That's the thing, best-selling author in the world. There's been a move towards YA actually becoming a category in the UK. And something that started to happen in YA, which is interesting, is the genre started to emerge. People started writing crime novels for young people, started writing fantasy novels, SF novels for young people. It's not to say these things didn't exist before. They did, but they weren't as focused and commercial in that way. So what happened was that young women started writing fantasy for a young female audience, predominantly. Sarah J. Maas comes to mind because she's sort of like one of the head of the pack there. And over the last 10 years, that's swelled. The audience has grown up and they now want something more adult. Now, what that usually means is more sex and violence, which is very often where the romance element comes in as well. So forgive me for being cynical, but that is largely the fact of it. So as we're talking about SFF, science fiction and fantasy, and that in itself is the problem, the two things being categorized together, the fact is that the category has really surged in that first quarter, and it's up £6 million, which is about 57%, to 16.7 million, which is the sort of record for the first quarter of the year since accurate records have been kept. Now, the thing to remember is that there's only really been accurate records for about 10 or 15 years, so that's all we have to go by. Before that, the data is very compartmentalized. Since Nielsen Bookscan come on and we can actually track what actually happens with the sales of every single book, then that's there. You can't access it, of course. This is a sort of book trade professional thing. Another reason why sales were so big in SFF is because of what I call the unit cost, or the average selling price. So the average selling price of books in that category went to £11.99, just under £12, and that's about £1.30 more than it was in the same quarter in 2023. And that's because, of course, some of these books are coming out in hardcover when they're originals. By originals, we mean a brand new book in hardcover, or a book which is issued in paperback instead of a hardcover. Sometimes it's a trade paperback, a large format paperback, bigger than a B format paperback. This really means that, people are keen, because of the series model, to buy the new hardcover, keep up with the saga and get ahead, even though hardcover books now, usually, instead of having a shelf life of a year, in a lot of cases it's down to 6 months, which I personally think is unhealthy. I think they need to have a full year in hardcover still, but that's just me, and that's what I'm used to. And I still think that's the most sustainable model to keep book sales going in hardcover. I think that's really important. So that's why the average value, the unit cost, has gone up, because people are buying the hardcovers or the large format trade paperbacks. It's mostly hardcovers, and it's mostly fantasy is what we're talking about. So the top title in the first quarter was House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas, and in its launch week it hit number 1. That was in February, and the average sort of price of that was about £17.30, £17.40, and that is £2.85 to £3 greater than the hardback price of the second book in the series, which is House of Sky and Breath, and that came out in 2022. There's quite a long lead time in between the two, so 2 years. So the category is doing really, really well. Now, Sarah J. Maas was the top author across the whole UK market for books for SFF. If you look at the top selling books in the UK, 1 in every 4 throughout that quarter was an SFF title. Really, they were all fantasy titles pretty much. And if you look at original fiction, new books, but brand new books, whether they're brand new in hardcover or they just go into paperback originals instead of hardcover, if you look at the top 12 of them in quarter 1, 11 of them were from SFF. So there you go. So they're basically all fantasy novels. There weren't any SF novels in that. Something that's contributed to these sales as well are these kind of subscription services that you get from people like Broken Binding, Fairy Loot, or Illumicrate. So you get these things and they comes in a nice box, and often they have decorated end papers and sprayed edges and what have you. So you get that sort of thing. Somebody else who did really well in the first quarter was Rebecca Yarros, and Frank Herbert also came back in a big way. And of course, that's because of the Dune films. It's because Dune 2 has come out recently. So it's not really something that's driven just by books, it's driven by mass media. And you've got to remember, Dune, came out in 1965, and it's had a number of adaptations. So it really isn't anything special. It's driven by a mass media thing. As for Yarros, the Imperia novels, they sold more than 90,000 copies altogether in that quarter, which is pretty amazing. And if you compare that to Frank Herbert, I don't have figures for that, but he went back into the top 50 with Dune, which for a book which came out in 1965 is good. But remember, as I say, that's because of the film. When you look at the 12 weeks ending on the 23rd of March and the sales there, if you look at the top 30 books in that period, the one that comes in the top in the SFF category is the book which came in at number 23, and that's House of Flame and Shadow, as I say, by Sarah J. Maas. And that sold 60,281 copies in the UK in that time. This is interesting because what this has done for Bloomsbury, who publish that book, they also publish my books as well, is that the big 4 UK publishers are about to become the big 5. Now, the big 4 publishers are all conglomerates: Penguin Random House, Hachette, HarperCollins, Pan Macmillan, and Pan Macmillan did about 17.5 million quid in that period. Now, Bloomsbury in that first quarter did 14.7 million, so it's not that far behind. So it really, really does show you how Bloomsbury are being boosted by Sarah J. Maas. I can't really say it's the same for my books, but there you go. So just to run through the top 5 SFF titles and authors in that period, what we have at number 5, Olivia Blake's books, the Atlas books, did really well, and her total sales were £435,000, which is not to be sniffed at. At number 4, Hannah Kaner, who's relatively new. This is only the second book I think has come out recently. And they have a kind of sort of folk horror feel looking at the covers, a little bit Mythago Wood. And £463,000 was her thing. Then we have Frank Herbert, who of course is no longer with us, off the back of the Dune movies. And obviously Dune sells really well anyway. It always has done. It's kind of a rite of passage books. People read it. And sadly, I wish people would read something a little bit more literary as their entry into SF, like say Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But it is what it is. But Frank Herbert, his sales in that first quarter in the UK were £584,000, which is pretty good, really. At number 2, Rebecca Yarros, we've already mentioned. Her sales is a big jump here, were £944,000, which is pretty amazing because that's edging up towards, £1 million, which is really, really amazing. And at number 1, the undisputed queen of romantasy, and she has been from the beginning, let's be honest, is Sarah J. Maas. And Sarah's sales in the first quarter were £3,122,000. So there you go. She's doing okay. So she can take us all on holiday, I guess. Good luck to her. So that's the situation at the moment. So how has this affected the science fiction field? Well, as I've said in another video, the fact is this. At all the major publishers, the budgets for science fiction and fantasy, whether it's the publishing, the marketing, what have you, are one thing. They'll come under one imprint. Like say, for example, HarperCollins has the Voyager imprint for its SFF. Gollancz, of course, is only science fiction and fantasy, and so on. And what these publishers will do is they regard the two things as the same, and they will go where the money is because they're in the business of selling books and making money, which is absolutely fine. As a bookseller, I'm fine with that. I want to see bestsellers. I want to see people enjoying things. And it's important to have bestsellers because without bestsellers, the industry cannot support the more unusual titles. But I do feel at the moment that the baby is being thrown out with the bathwater because as more and more the money goes towards fantasy, the traditional established markets for SF, they're getting less funding, and it's really been noticeable the last couple of years how little SF has been published in the UK and how little of that has been literary SF. So if you're a more mature author with a following which will largely have a disposable income, if you're an up-and-coming reader and you're not satisfied with the consensus and you want to read something unusual, then the likes of people like Adam Roberts, Nina Allen, Dave Hutchinson, M. John Harrison, the remaining new wavers like him and Michael Moorcock, and the more unusual small press people, and they're not going to get the marketing and the attention and the advances and the push into the bookshops that they need. So this is the problem. While science fiction and fantasy come from the same budgets, we're going to have these issues. Now you could say, well, publishers, they'll go where the money will go anyway, so they'll put the money there. But the fact is this, unless science fiction gets more support from publishers and from you, the readers out there, from all of us who are reading, unless we buy new books of quality and we vote with our pockets, we're going to see a further decline in the publishing of science fiction in this country. And I would say to young readers, please don't just go with Asimov, Heinlein, Clarke. I mean, you probably don't go for Heinlein these days. You'd go for Frank Herbert instead. Those are the big four, as Brian Aldiss call them. Don't just go with those things. Ask some booksellers who seem to know what they're talking about and go for things which are a bit newer. Try some things in Gollancz Masterworks in terms of literary quality. Try some Philip K. Dick and Robert Silverberg. There's lots of great stuff out there by female authors as well. Try reading Kindred by Octavia Butler. It's a good one for those of you interested in the identity politics thing. And it's not a new book. It'll show you that things like that have been happening for a long time. Try some Ursula Le Guin, similar ballpark. There is a lot of great stuff in there, backlist for you to read as well. You don't just have to read the pulpy guys because there is a lot more to the literature. And if you want to read something like that, try Cordwainer Smith because, he'd blow you away. He really would. So that's enough of me proselytizing about what I think you should be reading. Those are the facts and figures. It is quite a bleak picture for SF. Is the romantasy trend going to continue? The feeling at the moment in publishing is that it's starting to get a bit weary and a bit tired, but I think that's publishers getting weary and tired. I'm not seeing the readers feeling the same way. And I spend a lot of time every week. I talk with the readers. I listen to what they say. I hear them talking to each other in the bookshop where I work. And I am continually refilling shelves with YA and romantasy, and much, much less so with traditional SF and traditional sword and sorcery. And that's the reality of the situation. So it is a bit grim for those of us who like the established forms. Anyway, this is Outlaw Booksellers signing out for now. Please like, subscribe, comment. If you've not watched before, do check out the backlist. There'll be a lot more here coming on genre fiction, also on general fiction and the culture of books from an experienced voice. And have a great day. Bye for now.